Corruption activist and author of Hijackers on board, Cynthia Stimpel, joins us now to speak to us about the Steinhoff saga. Very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us. So in a nutshell, you've written about this. For those who've not been following the story, what is at stake, particularly between SARS and the Steinhoff executives?
Thanks for having me on your show. The focus here is just the way Steinhoff has behaved from a leadership and an ethical perspective, how they manage their finance. So from a corporate governance perspective, they had a two-tier board, which were not independent thinking and critical thinking. So that was part of their demise. The way their corporate strategy was that they focused on aggressive mergers and acquisitions. And that is where the current problem is regarding the exchange control now through the mergers and acquisitions and how they accounted for it. So part of the collapse of Steinhoff was basically through the accounting system and the irregularities that were reported and discovered much later, but not reported timelessly. And obviously they, when reviews were done, they found that they were all misleading, that they were false, and they were quite material. So yeah, there's a long list of
and that's what I want to get to. Was this a general practice to misrepresent the balance sheet to shareholders? And how many transactions are we speaking of here, and the value thereof?
Regarding the Steinhoff, if you think their initial background, when they started off as a small organization in Germany and then grown and obviously had an organization here in South Africa, I don't think that was their normal, that would have been their business practice to hide data or misrepresent data. So they would have probably functioned quite effectively then, and that's why they became the darling of the JSE in those early years. But when you are acting in such a way that you're not transparent in your transactions, you're not reporting every single detail of how you did that transaction and how it's impacting your balance sheet, of course then the way the board was structured, it was then a method that they used to either hide information or not be transparent about it. And so here we're talking about tens of billions that were lost. If you just think when their share price collapsed, 95% of their shareholder value was eroded. And that had knock-on effects for many companies who had invested in Steinhoff.
And the executives, how many in their numbers? I mean, there's been a particular focus at some point on Markus Jooste. Then when the details started coming out, it was reported that he made an hasty exit. That was in 2017. Some background to, in particular, his involvement at the company and the executives that are now under the spotlight. When they were arrested, there didn't seem to be clarity at the point whether or not he's on the charge sheet. Markus Jooste, that is.
Yes, well, at the time, he made his hasty resignation, obviously because of the collapse of the share price, and then the mere fact that all the atrocities and the misrepresentation of the financials were being in the media space. If one looks back, seeing Steinhoff then, everybody was willing to invest with them. Everybody felt that that was the ideal organization to be associated with. In the meantime, from a corporate governance perspective, their directors weren't behaving ethically and they weren't being showing clear oversight. So they should have oversight strategically. And they were, if you think where Markus Jooste alone in his role was being involved operationally as well as from a perspective as a director, and he had all the control at the time, and he had a personality which was quite charismatic for most people, and people believed what he said. So in the boardroom, if he gave any stipulated why something has happened, what mergers they've done, how they've accounted for it, and which section of their business they've placed it, he was believed, and nobody ever followed up and checked on it. And it was only much later when it was discovered that obviously those were factually not true.
And let's look at some of those discoveries. It was reported that the Reserve Bank used a handwritten 376 million rand invoice in the case against Jooste. If you could just take us through that, but also SAB's own culpability, quote unquote, and I say that because there was a time that they were being allegedly sued or being sued for allegedly enabling Steinhoff to move assets worth about 19 billion euros overseas. What happened there?
I don't have all the details of that because it's not a case I've followed, I would say, very closely. But if one looks at just the method that they used of reporting and now contravening exchange controlled regulations, hence the reason why SARS is, the Reserve Bank is now involved. So they were obviously, for every transaction you do from an exchange control perspective, you have to get the exchange control approvals for that. And they were obviously not obtaining those approvals, and they were undermining or hiding those transactions that they were doing, and then hiding them from their financials and not reporting them. And if one has to do the ratios that should have been calculated around the financials, they would have found all the red flags and the signals saying that this is not kosher, that something is wrong in their financial base.
Cynthia, we thank you so much for your time in unraveling some of this for us. Corruption activists and also of hijackers on board, Cynthia Stimpel. Thank you very much.